The title of this is Europe's Refugees and Migrants, a Christian Response. And I want to look at this in two parts. One is the reality of what's happening right now with the current crisis of refugees in the world. And it's important to ask that question, what is the reality? And then second, a Christian response. And this is all about helping churches to be realistic in their ministry in reaching out to refugees. So two parts that helps me as I try to go through the material and try to keep it straight in my mind what I want to say today to you. This is the second time I've shared this. I shared it as well earlier in the Politics and Society Network, and so it's a whole different group. I don't know you guys. I'm really glad you're here. Thank you for coming. My name is Paul Sydnor. I work in the International Association for Refugees. This is our association here, and our website and my email. I am originally from America, in Virginia, but I've lived in Europe now for over 25 years, almost 25 years. I lose count because you go home sometimes and I've been back to study. My wife is from Germany. We have 3 children. They were raised in Austria, in Germany, in America, and now in France. They're in university right now. So I feel more at home in Europe than I feel with my own relatives in America. So I'm really glad to be here. That's a little bit about my background. I came to Europe for the second time after university. I wanted to work cross-culturally. God just put that in my heart. And I didn't know how to do it. And I saw on the university library during exams information about OM. I had no idea who they were, but they were looking for English teachers to work on one of their ships. So I said, well, I can do that. I was in English, I studied English, so I went to do that, and I ended up in Vienna, not on the ships. And I was in Vienna, and I was traveling and bringing literature into Eastern Europe at that time, and visiting churches and bringing supplies for teaching and literature and medicine and so forth. So that was my first time meeting East Europeans. And I usually met them in the dark and met them very fast in passing. And it was hardly a meeting at all. And so when I was back in Vienna, I would actually go and really meet East Europeans who were refugees at that time, political refugees living, who had come out and were in Austria, and they were hoping to immigrate. And so that's where I started this work that I'm doing now, working with refugees. And so I began to teach English with them, and through that I met the man that I'm working with now, who has founded this organization called the International Association for Refugees. And we started working together at that time. And as I think about this ministry, what has been important for me is really the connection, the personal connection that comes, connecting with people's lives. And that's the first step to really sharing Christ and the love of Christ with them, is to connect with their personal lives. And I was back home visiting some relatives, and one of them, when they heard what I was doing, they said, well, you have refugees in your family. Did you know that? I said, oh, really? No. He said, yeah. He was someone who studied the genealogy of the family, and he had collected this information. And he found in one of the articles in a library from England an announcement of a marriage of a woman, one of my ancestors, who escaped from France, hidden in the back of a wine cart in a barrel. And she was a Huguenot. And she was fleeing in the 1700s and was smuggled out of France and said who passed to the Low Country and then came to England, and she met someone in England, and they were married, and so the announcement was put in this paper at that time. And then they actually came to America. So this was on my maternal side. And just connecting with refugees is to find that personal connection is really important. And that's the first step I've found in really having an effective response is being able to facilitate that connection to refugees and with refugees. Perhaps before I go further and get into more of what this reality looks like, I just want to highlight some of the resources here that have been helpful to us, and a lot of them come from us. This is the Refugee Highway Partnership, and this is a network that we've helped to build up together with organizations from around the world, and it's organized regionally, and there is a very active network here in Europe called the Refugee Highway Network, and this is the website for that. And once a year, there is a World Refugee Sunday, and that's this year on these dates. And this is the time for us to stand in solidarity, basically, and to pray for this situation, to bring it up in our churches. And you can find information about this here on this website. So it's a helpful website. This is my own organization. We have a lot of tools as well for ministry. This has been an important website. The Evangelical Alliance in Europe, the European Evangelical Alliance, has helped to set up a website, pulling in lots of resources from around Europe, from different organizations, and you can find those here. And then these are two other websites in Europe, Asylum in Europe, and they give really a lot of current news about what's going on with asylum issues in Europe. And this one is from the EU Commission. And that's a huge website, and one particular part, I think it's politics and justice. So one page has a lot about migration. So those are some really helpful information about this issue. When my director talks about refugees, we want to be so careful to help people see the hope, see what God is doing in this situation, because when we look at it, there are lots of reasons to be afraid, lots of reasons to be concerned about the issues, lots of reasons to think, I should not be naive about what is going on. And even just in the conversations over these past days, people have raised those kinds of questions. And it is amazing how quickly the church is so shaped by the media, and how sensational that media wants to be in terms of depicting what is going on. And I have, especially now as we look at the reality, fear, more than anything else, seems to drive the church. And that just seems to go against who we are as God's people. A people of hope, a people of love, a people with a future. And so my director, Tom Alvinson, he really likes to point out reasons that we should find hope in this situation. And one of them is that God is at work among refugees. One reason is that God is at work among refugees. And so I was at a meeting recently with my director, and in that meeting, one of the workers there from another organization shared how they were going into the camps where there were refugees and children, bringing supplies to them. And I think this story is even posted on Facebook, but I'm sharing it at least 2 or 3, persons removed, but it's still a powerful story. And she shared how she was with a group, and they went in and they were bringing art supplies to children, crayons and paper for the children in the camp to draw. That was all. That was their ministry on that day. And they dropped this off and gave this to the children. And then they came back a week later or sometime later and finding out about, well, so how is it going? And there was a group around them, and they were with one family. And the family said, we'd love to show you what our children drew and what they've done. And so they showed them the pictures. And someone in the family said, well, be sure to show that picture. And I said, no, that's not important. I wouldn't be interested in that. One of the other children had drawn another picture. So they encouraged them, yeah, show us. So they pulled out a picture of a man on the cross, on a wooden cross. And this was a young child, a boy, who knows how to write, because he had written on the bottom, the man who will end wars. That's what he written. The man who will end wars. And so they were asking about this. It's pretty amazing. He said, yes, I heard this in my dream. And this is what I saw in my dream. And so I drew this picture. And the parents said, yeah, can you tell us about this? And they were not Christian. And what an amazing way. And to me, a wonderful example and a reminder to us of how God is at work in the lives of refugees. And if you work in this among refugees much, it doesn't take long before you hear lots of stories like this. And it's so encouraging. I think that was one of the things when I was first working with refugees and having lots of Bible studies and just interacting with them and doing things with them. I was so blessed by it. And we said, more Christians need to have this, need to experience this, need to be part of this. And we began to realize indeed that this mandate to love the stranger and love the alien, it wasn't just given to a missionary or to a pastor or to some specialist. It was given to God's people. God said, you should love the alien among you as you love yourself. And that's repeated so often to Israel. So lots of reasons to see and to know that God is at work. And so I've just mentioned a few of them here. The theme of nations and highways streaming through the scriptures. There are so many themes in the scriptures related to refugees, but this is one that really, I think this is one that really comes under this whole idea of a network of people working on this highway. People, the churches along this highway, ready and willing to welcome the stranger. The idea, and we see it in the scriptures, is that God has people, God places people on this highway to Him. And there is a way to God. There is the way of Christ. And you see it throughout the scriptures. Isaiah preaches it so much. And Jesus Himself tells the story of the parable, of the feast in the kingdom and bringing the guests in. He says, and go out into the highways and bring them in. And so this I think, how do we see this at work? We see it at work in the Word of God. The Word of God is so full of this theme of God showing that I am with you. I am with the poor, the alien, the stranger. And the refugee nowadays in today's world is above all. They are the widow, the alien, the orphan. They are the poor of this world. And so we see it in God's Word. We see God at work also just in what is happening around the world in terms of people moving, in terms of diaspora. I don't have a slide of it, but there is, according to a recent UN statistic, there is an estimate of 244 million people living outside of their origin. A lot of these people are in diaspora. And so there have been two kinds of diaspora. When people talk about diaspora, you have a Jewish diaspora, people that identify ethnically with the group and so on. And then you have a Greek diaspora, people that really are moving out for economic reasons. But there's talk nowadays and looking just historically at how people have moved through the centuries. There's a third kind of diaspora, which is centered around Christian community. It's like a spiritual. The idea is that this is, besides economic, besides ethnic, there's also a spiritual diaspora. And this guy particularly is arguing that Christians make up a spiritual diaspora, where the diaspora is centered on the love of God, the love of Christ, and the community that forms around this. So it's a spiritual diaspora. And And I think this is evidence as well of God at work. He is building His kingdom exponentially, not simply one people at a time now, but He's building it. He's building a kingdom, and not just a people, but He's building a kingdom. I think more than anything, this work has helped me as well. I've always often asked myself, God, you really haven't given me a people group. I haven't adopted a people group. Often people will ask me, well, don't you learn that language? Or, God has called me to a certain people. And working with refugees, I've never had that call. And the call has been, this has helped me to understand, the call for me has been to the kingdom of God and recognizing that God is at work in more than just one group of people. He's at work in the world among all the nations. And so we see this happening nowadays, especially with so many people on the move. Yeah, there it is. There's the statistic. The UN reports 244 million people living outside of their origin. So this is how we see God at work. But finally, the stories of refugees themselves, like the one I already shared, those stories, to me, more than anything, illustrate God's plan, God's work, God's plan of using the nations, of using people in movement, moving from place to place. I think it really makes us hold on loosely to the things of this world. It helps us to identify more closely with God and those things that are near to Him and to Christ. And so the stories of God's people along this highway, for me, more than anything, illustrate God's work. And not recently, but one of the people I've met, one of the great heroes in my chapter, anyway. We have the heroes in Hebrews. Well, a hero that I can think of is Hamilton from Eritrea, and he came through Libya as a refugee. And when he was in Libya, he was imprisoned twice. And while he was in prison, he realized that that there were many of those in prison who would receive visits from their embassies and from their family. But as a refugee, there was no embassy, there was no country that cared about him. There was no family that could come to him. He was totally alone. And he realized the significance of the truth that Jesus is our representative at the right hand of God, and that Jesus was his advocate in heaven. And he realized that he could have no greater representative and no greater lawyer than Christ himself. And he came to really see this reflected in his own experience, this truth. And he was in Libya for some time. In fact, he decided to even remain in Libya because of the prison experience he had gone through and the horrific experience of that, to stay there to help other fellow travelers, to help them along this journey, to strengthen them. He told stories of one man who was paralyzed in a car accident, and he was able to help to get him out, evacuated. He eventually came to Europe, and that's where I met him. And he told this story that when the Arab Spring broke out in 2011, he was in bed at night when suddenly he woke up with this scripture on his mind, and he said, I just had to pray because this scripture kept coming to my mind. And so he said it was from Isaiah 64, and this is on his heart. I want to hear it, So I want to read it to you as well. In verse 4, it says, Since ancient times, no one has heard, no ear has perceived, no eye has seen any God besides you, who acts on behalf of those who wait for him. And I think of what Dr. Piper has been sharing with us just about the glory of God, and that this is about God's glory. This is about God himself. And here we have it in the scriptures. This is about what God is doing. And God was impressing this on him. And this has been his own personal experience, that God is at work in your life. He is standing for you. He is standing for me in this gap. And he woke up with this prayer on his heart. And the next morning, he opened his computer. Before I say that, I'll say one reason that the Arab Spring was such a concern, and this was such a concern for him, was not only because he had been in Libya himself, but he still had family there. He had a brother that was passing through at that time, right then. And it was so hurting him, and so worried for his brother. And he opened his computer, and there on the front page of the news was an announcement from the Maltese government that anyone stuck in Libya can go to the harbor at this address and get on this ship, and we'll bring you to Malta. And so he called his brother. He said, order a taxi right now, get in there and go. And he called the officials in Malta, and he had to be on the phone between them and Libya and them in Malta to make sure his brother would be on the list as an asylum seeker with no passport. And his brother was able to do that. And Hamilton just said, he said, every time I think of how God is at work among refugees, this verse, he said, it clicks to my mind. This verse clicks to my mind that God is at work. He is active for us. And when you work with refugees, you see that happening. It's a powerful thing. I love it. And that's one reason, it's a huge reason to have hope. So what is this reality? This is the reality. But let's look at it more globally as well. This is a tool that we have each year. The UN is the keeper of statistics and numbers about refugees, and each year in June they come out with an update. And this is from last year in 2015. And so this compiles some of those statistics into questions, a lot of questions that people are asking about refugees. And I just want to highlight a few. 60 million, first one right there, 60 million people displaced, forcibly displaced in the world. That's more than ever before. Something is going on, and God is in the midst of this. 10 million of these people have no passport. They have been born stateless, born in refugee camps, and they're ones who die in refugee camps. So it's a huge issue. It's not just something that we endure. And it was for a phase of our life for a few years, because it's going to get better. There are people around the world in refugee camps that are there for life. And people have estimated about 17 years on the average. When a person becomes a refugee, they are a refugee for about 17 years. And that's a long time. That's an extremely long time. 89% of the world, of the refugees in the world, are not in Europe, are not in America. They are hosted in the developing world. Countries like Kenya and Malawi and Jordan, Lebanon, 89%. And that's an important reality for us to hear when we consider the crisis that we are facing with so many people coming into our own borders. It's important to realize that there are others out there in the world who are facing the same, and if not more, pressure. I think if you were to compare the statistics in Lebanon, 1 in 4 people is a Syrian refugee in Lebanon. 1 in 4 people. The UN has identified 3 solutions for these people who are displaced. One solution is that they would be resettled to a place that can resettle them and give them a new life. The second solution is that they would integrate where they are. So those coming here and applying for asylum, the idea is that they would integrate. And the third is that they would return home. Well, less than 1% of the refugees, of the displaced people in the world, find a solution. So what in the world do we do with that? This issue of displacement is not going away. So this is the global reality. And I just want to back up and pause here before we look more specifically at Europe. I include this as well to address the reality. The reality is that it's very complex. I probably don't need to say that, but when we talk about forcibly displaced people, like 60 million displaced people, it's a whole spectrum of people, and I've listed them here. And we won't get into this, but there's a lot of different people out there, and they're all mixed together. And so when we have asylum seekers coming into Europe, there are some that are coming as undocumented migrants who really are economic migrants. And there are some refugees that are like that, who are refugees, but they're really economic migrants. Just as over here, there are some migrants who are refugees, who have valid reasons for coming to Europe to look for a job because they would fear for their life in their own country. And so it's just a whole mix of reasons, and it's very complex, like any person's life. It's complex. It's too complex to divide and to make it black and white and say, well, this one is in and this one is not. When someone is displaced, they have been moved, they have been uprooted, and when it's involuntary, when it's with force, it's forced displacement. And a philosopher in France said that to be rooted is perhaps the most important human need of the soul. And I think that's what to me, this work, this refugee ministry and working among displaced people is all about helping people come to terms with their place in the world, with where God has placed them, with the identity God has given them, and finding their identity in Christ, finding a new identity. And if we get too concerned or overwhelmed by the complexity of it, it makes it difficult. I think that Jesus' example is a good reminder to us in the Scriptures. The one example is of the parable of the Good Samaritan, where the lawyer asks him the very question, well, who is my neighbor? Who should I help? And Jesus tells him and asks him the question, so which of these is your neighbor? And then as well, Jesus himself says, I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. So let's look more closely at the reality. What is the reality here in Europe? As we know, it's quite big. Over 1 million came into Europe last year. This is one of the pressing issues now that's come up in Europe is the realization of how many unaccompanied minors, how many children are on this highway and traveling like this. And this shows the countries they're coming from. One that's not on here, that is the largest, is Afghanistan. And this shows where they're going to, the countries. And so 58,000 are in Sweden. This is where they are right now. And this is showing the numbers in 2015 and the numbers in 2008. And you can see it's quadrupled. It's grown so much. This is showing where the refugees are coming from. And I'll point out 4 groups of people. You have Syrians that make up about a quarter of the asylum seekers coming into Europe. You have people from Iraq and Afghanistan that share second and third in terms of the numbers in the last 3 months. And then the 4th highest is actually from the West Balkans. People coming in from there, asking for asylum in Europe. So what is the current state of the reality in Europe? Well, as we know, Europe has begun putting up fences and borders, and there's one here, especially a big one between the UK and France. That's where I work and live, up here. And refugees will come up through Europe, and there's about anywhere from 4,000 to 8,000, the estimates here in Calais, in this area of undocumented, unregistered people that want asylum in the UK. There's a big divide right there. They can't pass it. They've got a huge fence now, and they just hit a brick wall, and they can't go forward. And so they're stuck there. So there is, as a result of these fences, especially here in, where are we? Where's Greece? There we go. As a result of this fence here, there are 90%, in the last, since January, there's been a reduction by 90% of the people entering Europe. That's huge. That's not happened. There's this agreement with Turkey that I question. There's a lot of questions as to whether it's going to go through, whether Turkey can actually be a country of asylum, whether there are issues there in that country that make it dangerous for people. So that remains to be seen whether that's going to go through. But as it is now, Europe is willing to pay 6 billion euros for this. There is 90% reduction, and now as of last month, there have been more people that have entered now through Italy than have come in through Greece. And so this is pointing us to most likely the fact that people are going to find another route, and most likely through Libya again. And you'll find people coming through here. And it's not only dangerous in Libya on land with all the groups there that want to profit from this, but then at sea it's a bigger sea passage and more people die, and we're already seeing that in the news. So that's the current state of things here in Europe and what it is looking like. We worked a long time in Austria. And 6 years ago, we moved to northern France. And we work with churches. We really believe that God's vehicle, I mean, we all know He's put the church here for His work. So we work with churches. And we understand relationship. It's built into our DNA as Christians. And so the church is the primary resource in terms of refugee ministry and reaching out to them. And so, unfortunately, it's also one of the hardest things to work with in the world, God's church. So we spend a lot of time in advocacy, in helping people understand refugees and these issues. And we had folks over to our house once, and in France, there's a law actually for a long time that said it was illegal to help someone who had no papers. It was an old law, and they were reapplying it in the refugee issues. And so these people in our church said, well, we told them what we were doing. That's new to them, this kind of work that the church would do. Normally church does youth work, children's work, Sunday worship, or Bible study maybe. And that's it. But so refugee work, that's what the state does. That's what NGO does. That's what social workers do. And so their response was, don't you realize it's illegal to help refugees? It's illegal to love and welcome a stranger. So that's the reality among a lot of people. And we're helping to break that a little bit. So this is an overview of the reality. What about ministry? What about the second part to that question, the second part to our topic today? So let's look at this, and this is really the interesting part. What is a good ministry response? How do we respond effectively? And I'd like to begin with this. This is a ministry continuum that my director, Tom Alvinson, has developed, and it comes out of a long experience of working with refugees and just asking lots of good questions in terms of how people are doing it and what has worked effectively, and looking at how people are responding to refugee issues around the world. And so just continually looking at this question. One thing that's driven him and drives us as an organization is the realization that refugees are more than victims. And when you think of refugee ministry, people like this in crisis, you think of people in need. And you think of tents, shelter and food and medicine. And it's all about giving them. And it's all about their right to get these things. And it's just all about this, one-way transaction. But we so believe and we know, when you know these people, they are so much more than people in need. They're so much more than victims in need. They have so much to give, to offer. And we were in Rome 10 years ago helping to build up a ministry there, and with the hopes of seeing local churches able to open a center. And so we were meeting the different groups and churches, and there was one church in Rome that was reaching out to the refugees. And it started in the youth group. And they were having a Bible study on this verse, about Jesus being the stranger. And he said, "You welcomed me, and I was thirsty," and so on. And they said, "Well, so who is the stranger here that we should welcome?" And they remembered the refugees sleeping on the street behind the train station. And they said, "Well, they are, so let's go there and take them some tea." So they did that. They cooked their tea and they went there and served it to them at night. So that's when they could meet them. And they did that on a regular basis. And soon it became, they got to know these guys. And soon it became a meal. They said, "Well, come to our church. Come here, and we'll cook a meal for you." And so that went in from them cooking a meal to the refugees cooking a meal for them, and sharing food like this, and sharing one thing with the other, and the relationships were just growing like this, and they began playing sports together and doing activities together. And ministry just blossomed. These relationships blossomed. And as the youth leader was telling about this happening, she just stopped and she said, "We thought we were going to go and give to the refugees, but we've realized that they've given so much more to us." And so the point is that refugees are more than victims. They're more than victims in need. They have so much to give. How do we resource that? How do we tap into that resilience? How do we tap into that strength, into that resource, into that potential? So this continuum is all about that. And so I'll just go through it real quickly. You have over here a person in life, and a disaster comes, a humanitarian disaster, or whatever it may be. Usually it's war and violence and corruption. It comes in their life, and they take a nosedive, and it gets darker and darker. And they need security above all. They need shelter. They need food. They need water. They need a whole list of things. And only with these things will their life become stable. And there are a lot of people out there and a lot of organizations, as we've seen all over with the crisis now. And it's just amazing how many people have stepped up and are giving and wanting to be involved in this crisis. And they're all about, well, I've got some clothes to give. I've got some food to give. Can I bring that? Where can I drop it off? It's all about these transactions. And this takes a lot of logistical support, a lot of organization, and sometimes a lot of money. And there are groups that do it really well. And it stabilizes things. But the person is still way down here in life. They're way down below this normal level of living as a person. They're down here. Their life might be stable in a tent with a meal, but they're hardly recovered. They've hardly rebuilt their life. And so there's a second phase to the work that has to happen, and that's recovery work. And that is a much longer, slow process. And it involves tapping into people's faith, into their community, into their emotional well-being, into their capacity as people, and partnering together with them. So that's what recovery work is all about. And our director is developing now, my organization is developing a training aimed at at fleshing out this continuum, fleshing out this process of ministry, really looking at how these things happen so that we can help churches offer training to them where they can look at their capacities as a church and match it together with what the needs are of local refugees and find ways that fit them as a church, and find ways that work from their strength and not simply have been something of just going and jumping into the deep end, dropping off clothes or dropping off water, or jumping into a whole cesspool of trauma and crisis, and then ending up in trauma and crisis themselves as workers, So we're really looking at trying to bring a training like this to churches that would flesh this out, and that churches are engaging with and able to decide how they can best do refugee ministry. And the idea is that a person reaches a new normal, and in Christ we have a new normal. We not only have normal life, we have super life, and that's the idea. That's the importance of the church being involved in this. So this is what we call a response continuum. Two aspects to it: an emergency response and recovery response. And before we end and take questions or further comments, I just want to. I've thought more about it, and particularly in our context in Europe. What are the issues of this kind of ministry that really seem to be pulsating here in Europe? And for me, as I reflect on my own experience, what is it that's important for us to consider when we try to respond to refugees? And I've listed three. Hopefully, maybe you have other ideas and other things that you could expand on as well. But the first one is that when we respond and when we're helping people recover, our ministry, our work needs to address issues of identity. So a refugee is someone whose life has been broken apart. And if you think of a life as a chain, it's a beautiful chain around their neck, it's where all those links have been broken and just fallen into a pile at their feet. And all they have is a pile of broken links. And so how do we begin to put that identity back together and to make sense of it? One of the things that has been helpful for me is looking at the experience according to refugees and how they see it. And I've identified these different areas that really have affected them tremendously in their lives in positive and negative ways. So the conflict is often what has caused them to flee. They have faced hopelessness beyond any imagination, where they wake up each day and continually face no options. It's negative, but the positive thing about that is that they are somehow able to break through those through that wall of constantly having no options. Man, wouldn't you want that kind of person on your team, in your church, in your company? So they're incredibly resourceful and able to break through the hopelessness and to solve problems. They are people who have gone through trauma and know what trauma is and relive that trauma. They're people that experience violence and death. And they're people that are discriminated against. I mean, you can't get much darker than that. That is a dark night of the soul. It's the core experience that they have. That's their identity. It's an identity that they feel trapped in and they want to break out of. Miroslav Volf, I have a note here, and I'd like to bring it in somehow. This is about how we identify these refugees, right? And it's related, I think, to how we identify them. So this is how they identify themselves, and it's related to how we identify them. So we think of refugees, I'm thinking of three categories. In terms of citizens, we think of people in our society. Citizens, immigrants, and others. And so we are citizens. I'm an immigrant. I'm an accepted immigrant. Maybe you are too, where you live, as a student, as a skilled worker, as someone with a passport and a visa. You're an immigrant. That's okay. But the one that's really problematic in Europe is this category of the other. And unfortunately, refugees fit into that category. It's so complex, we have no way of understanding. It's difficult for us. We don't have a category for them often. They're discriminated against because they are different. They are perceived as a threat. They're perceived as someone that's going to come and take from us and not give to us, but only people with entitlement, people with rights only, and our rights are forgotten and our rights are trampled on as a nation and country. And so these are other people that we want to keep out. And Miroslav has been helpful for me in thinking about this. It's a little bit along the lines of Jesus sharing the parable of the Good Samaritan, and in thinking himself about the exclusion that happens in society. He says that it's really important to differentiate between others based on our sinful preference and based on an objective evil. And that's helped me a little bit to put my understanding around this and to figure out what's going on. How do we relate? How do we help people who are perceived as others? How do we help them to come into this society? And how do we help them in this society? How do we address issues of identity, of identifying these people? I'll tell you another story related to this identity. So I was in Calais, where we work. And when this crisis in Calais broke out, the refugees were living in the city, several hundred, and they've never had a working relationship with the mayor of the city. They have lived in the shadows and abandoned buildings and under bridges in the city, and the people, the mayor of Calais, the people of Calais have not welcomed them at all. And so they moved them out of the city as this crisis broke. And there's no way they could have 3,000 refugees in the city. So they moved them out into the dunes, probably 3 kilometers from the city center, 5 kilometers. And they're living there. And as it broke out, there were tents. Maybe it was several hundred people living under plastic in tents like this. And I was walking through the path on these things, through these tents, and a man came up to me and was really friendly, and he spoke perfect English, and he said, my name is Mohammed, and I'll tell you about my story. I said, I'm here just looking at, find out the situation. He said, I'll tell you about my situation. And he said, when I was in Afghanistan as a boy, my village was bombed, and my parents sent me away for protection with my uncle who lived in another country. And I went there, and after some time, he couldn't keep me anymore. And so he sent me away and said, go to Europe. So I found my way to Europe. As a boy, no map, found his way to Europe. And he made his way to France, and he was taken in as a minor. And he learned, went to school and learned French. And at 18, the French said, okay, you're an adult now. You have to leave the country. You have no papers, and you can't stay here. You don't belong here. And so he made his way to Calais for the first time, and he passed through Calais and ended up in the UK and was there for some years, and was deported again. He had no papers and was deported again. I came back 3 times through Calais, and there I was meeting him the 3rd time. And he said, I don't have, no one wants me. I don't belong anywhere. I said, I don't have any identity anymore. I have no contact with my family anymore. I'm even beginning to lose memory of my language. And when I look on a map, my village doesn't even exist. He said, I have no idea of who I am. And so when I think, involve ourselves in refugee ministry, we need to address issues of identity. We need to relate to the local context. And I really think this is important because this is about what the local church can do. And it's about picking up other people where the local church is and meeting them. What are the issues that are on the heart of the local church? What are their concerns? How are they being honored and listened to? And how are they taking that into this issue? It starts with prayer. It often starts with older people who have time and want to pray, share prayer requests. But we look for the key. What is going to be the key in order to create ministry in a local context here with my local church? Just a real short story. When we were in Austria, there was a brothel that had refugees and prostitutes. Refugees were on one floor, prostitutes on the other. That was their place. And no one in the city wanted to be associated with that place. And so we went to visit them in the brothel, the refugees, and there were about 50 that lived there, and we were around a table, and one man said to me, at that time they were Chechen, Georgian refugees, and he said to me, this is amazing, this is wonderful, come again. And the Austrians, the people from the church loved it, and he said, this is the first time anyone has visited us in 3 years that I've been here. And so the leaders in the church took that to heart, and they came back again to do more things with this group of people. The village saw what was going on in this little church, in this little community, and maybe there was some jealousy going on. Maybe they said, it was kind of like maybe one group saying they can't outdo us, and so the mayor called together the group. They called together the priests, the city workers, and the small evangelical church to talk about how they as a community could reach out. And so the leader in the church said, we realized this was the key to reaching our own people. Our service among the refugees was the key to reaching our own people. That for the first time, we had a voice in our community. So that's the second one. And the third one is to engage the secularism. And we won't go there. We need time for questions and further comments. But this is a huge one, I think. And really important for us to just take stock of the fact that we live in a secular society and we minister in that, and refugees are coming into a secular society, very different from where they've come from. And how are we doing that and engaging in that? So that's a look at the reality and a look at what is realistic. Hopefully it's been helpful. I thank you for this chance. And I'd welcome any feedback, comments, or questions that you'd like to make.